Alright, so this video is going to be about why it's been hard for me to accept the fact that I have a disability. So when I was younger, my my grandmother had me in therapy, and the best way I can put it is, I guess, just say it flat out. I was being molested for a few years, and because of that, there were concerns with my behaviors, with me rocking, with me not eating, not being social, being very quiet, very angry, very violent to a degree. I was what they would consider a troubled child on the inside. Like troubled, like disturbed almost. Excuse me. But the problem was, now that I'm older, I know what the problem was. The people in my family were hiding and protecting the predator. So when I turned 16 and the predator decided to try me again, I told, and I did tell when I was younger, but nothing happened. So I told, and when I told, I began to experience being ostracized from my family at 16. There were things like, you can't come over to this person's house. You can't call this person's house. We don't want you around. And mind you, I was a teenager. I was a kid. So on top of all the other issues with my mom, being very abusive emotionally and psychologically, and it was always thrown up in my face by her that she didn't want me and all these different things. And then this abuse started, and then it stopped into about 2 years into it. And then these years went by. I turned 16, and bits and pieces of this is unfamiliar to me because I don't remember certain things. But a few years after the molestation stopped, my grandmother put me in therapy for these behaviors. And my grandmother was very intimidating to the therapist, and she would scare them and try to get them to diagnose me to get me labeled so that she can get a check for me. And I was smart enough to know that. But I was also restricted from telling the fact that I was being molested. I was restricted from telling them that I was being physically abused. I was restricted from telling them about the threats of being killed. My grandmother was very abusive, and she was very controlling. So when I would go to therapy, my grandmother would sit in the room, and the therapist will often ask her if she could speak with me by myself, and my grandmother wouldn't let her. And so My grandmother was just very focused on trying to get me labeled, but I wasn't giving them anything to label me with because I wasn't doing anything. But at home, I was responding to the abuse in ways that my grandmother didn't like. I was also in kinship care. It's like foster care, but with family. So every 6 months or so, these people will come to the house and want to interview me and ask me about my life and how I'm doing, if I'm being abused, if I'm being taken care of. And my grandmother would sit in earshot of this visit, intimidating. And I knew that if I was to tell the truth, I would get beat. So I couldn't really tell too much. After I was, years later, when I was essayed again by this same uncle, that's when trying to get me labeled went into overdrive. And to the point where my grandmother scheduled for me to get a psychological evaluation to get me labeled mentally unstable. And I was not mentally unstable. So I stayed strong for a lot of years. And everybody around me knew that I was extremely smart. My teachers, they really, in middle school and high school, mainly middle school, my teachers, and I still talk to them to this day, they did a lot of things for me. So when I would tell about what my uncle was doing, my grandmother stopped taking care of me. As you can see, I wear glasses. I can't see. If I were to take my glasses off, I wouldn't even be able to see myself on the phone. My vision is very bad. And it's been that way since I was 12. So if I don't have my glasses, I'm blind. I also have asthma. And my grandmother refused to get me an inhaler and glasses because I was telling on my uncle. They wanted me to stop telling on him. And I wasn't going to stop doing that. I wasn't going to be quiet about what they were allowing to happen. And so I continued to tell. And then I started to call CPS. And I started to call kinship care. And nobody did anything. I started to run away. I went to the police station. And I did this for years because he was still able to come around me and he would still try to touch me in front of people. And nobody would do anything. So the labeling or trying to get me labeled or deemed mentally unstable was something I fought so hard against in my childhood and teenage years that now that I'm seeing that I'm extremely affected by my childhood and teenage years, it's very hard for me to allow myself to accept that something is wrong, because in a way it would feel as if they're right. Because my whole family has been saying that I'm crazy for years, all because I told on my uncle. Even though he admitted it, even though we went to court, even though he was charged, and even though he gave me a public apology, they still, to this day, call me crazy. I'm still being treated funny. And it's a very traumatizing experience. This lasted for 10 years.